Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the Transformational Government Framework webinar. We have three presenters today, John Boris, Peter Brown, and Chris Parker. My name is Dee Scher. I will be acting as the moderator today. Just a few quick tips to get us going before we start our webinar. When you launch the software, you notice that a control panel came up on the right side of your screen. If you would like to collapse that control panel to enable you to see the presentation better, just click on your little orange arrow. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar. Please feel free to type those in at your convenience. I will take those at the end, assuming we have enough time for all of them. If we don't, I have a record of those questions, and we will make a best effort to contact everyone following the webinar. The webinar will be recorded. I will send a follow-up email with the link to the OASIS website that has this webinar, along with several other webinars that you might find interesting. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our first presenter, John Boris. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Dee, and let me show my screen. Right, okay, get ourselves organized. Okay, thank you, and welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us on this webinar. I hope you find it informative, and we're going to hopefully tell you what we're doing in terms of transformational government framework. So just a reminder of the objectives of the webinar. We want to tell you why we believe there's a new approach necessary, give you an overview of the framework that we're building, tell you about what we've done so far, give you some examples of current usages that we are aware of, and then hopefully convince you, both whether you're administrators, political leaders, or vendors, of the need to follow the TGF approach. There's our agenda for this session. I'll do a short introduction on what it's all about, and then hand over to my colleague Chris, who will give you a high-level overview of the framework. Peter will then pick up on the two main deliverables that we've actually produced so far, the core pattern language being the actual approved TGF specification. Then I'll come back and talk about our latest piece of work on policy products, and Chris is going to give you some instances of some use cases around the world that we're aware of, and then I'll just give you some highlights of where we are going next with our work. And then hopefully there'll be enough time, as Dee said, for some questions and answers. Okay, what is transformational government? This term is being used quite a lot these days, and there's different terms for it, different understanding of it. This is the definition that we are using with our own framework. And as I say, this is just our view of it. And the important part of this is the middle part of it. It's about putting the needs of citizens and businesses at the heart of the process. And this, I think, as I hopefully will show you shortly, is the fundamental change of approach from the what is now traditional EGovernment approach. We're building on EGovernment, and many of us have been with the EGovernment initiative for almost from day one, and certainly the early adopters have run into problems, and there's been a significant lack of success. That's not to say everything has been a total failure, but there has been a significant lack of success in many areas. Certainly the early adopters struggled to get a critical mass of users. That's improving nowadays, but it's still a challenge. Still a lot of duplicated IT expenditure, a lot of wasted resources, and again limited impact on the core public policy objectives. So these sorts of things are things we're trying to improve on and correct. For some of us who've been with government ICT right throughout, and I've been through much of this, I must confess, in the early days it was about putting big mainframes into back office and doing back office automation. And that proved to be successful, and there were benefits arising from that. Then we got into the e-government phase when it was about putting out services online, and that's where people have struggled to realize the benefits in that phase of activity. So we're now moving into this phase that we call transformational government, with the objective that the benefits realization can be improved, and we are seeing some signs of that coming about. Clearly, throughout all of this, there's the whole plethora of technologies that have come into play. We're now into social media and cloud and all of that, so those things have to be wound into this. But it's interesting, a quote here, a fairly recent quote from the World Bank, where they are recognizing this whole approach of transformational government. So it is becoming sort of a top table discussion item. If you look back at the early adopters of e-government, the column on the left is sort of a look back on how it was done. Not necessarily that we set out to deliver in that way, but that's the way it tended to turn out. Whereas in the right-hand column, you'll see the difference of approach that the transformational government objectives, and it does turn things on its head, and it's important to understand that. And if you summarize this, basically e-government was about bolting technology onto the existing business model of government. So there was very little focus, or has been very little focus, on changing the underlying business model of government or the business processes. It was all about just adding in technology. Whereas transformational government turns that on its head. It says we must look at the business changes needed first to unlock the benefits for citizens, and only when you've got those stakes in the ground properly, then should you consider the technology options and the delivery mechanisms. So there's quite a fundamental shift of emphasis, and that's one of the reasons why we are using the term transformational government. There's an increasing tendency to call some of this e-government 2 in many of the conferences and workshops I've attended in recent months and the last year or so. We don't really like the term e-government 2 because that suggests it's an enhancement of the original e-government concept. And as this slide tends to suggest, transformational government is something completely different, and therefore we felt a new term was better to distinguish between the two approaches. So just to summarize how we've got to where we are, many of us on the committee, or most of us on the committee, have been there for the last 10 years or so on e-government work, either as government representatives as part of programs delivering these e-government initiatives, or the supplier side who've helped governments to do it. So there's a wealth of experience and knowledge that we've learnt over the last 10 years, and we thought it was appropriate now to try and take that experience, learn the lessons, and move on. And the whole focus, as I said, is citizen-focused and business-driven approach, not a government organization approach. It does lead to significant levels of take-up, and that has been proved and is being demonstrated now by some of the leaders in this new approach. We have evidence that it does work in different types of government, so although the whole framework can be applied at a national level, it also will work at state or city levels, and there it may be appropriate to take some sort of subsets or slices of it, and we'll cover that particular dimension during these presentations. We've seen deployments already in Europe, Middle East, Far East, and Australia, and Chris will highlight some of those. And the purpose of our work now is to standardize this whole approach so that it can be delivered and embedded in tools by practitioners, be they government practitioners or consultancy houses supporting government initiatives. And again, we will touch on our intentions to try and provide or drive forward the development of these tools to reinforce the standards. So that's where we are at the moment. We have many ways of providing the information. We have our TC website where all of the documentation and material is freely available to be downloaded. We have a TC wiki that is there for developers, those who really want to get their hands dirty on all of this, and there we're providing advice and guidance, and as you'll see a bit later in the presentations, the policy product matrix. We have a LinkedIn group for those of you who are on LinkedIn, and that's another way of sharing and communicating with us. And if you don't want to use any of those, you can always drop me personally an email, and I'll do my level best to make sure you get a very quick response on it. So many ways to get in touch with us. And with that little brief introduction, I'll now hand over to Chris, who's going to give you an overview of the framework itself. So Chris, over to you.
Chris, we're not hearing you.
Hello, yeah, I had a problem. I was the button. Okay.
Perfect.
Can people hear and see my screen?
Yes.
I think so. Okay. So on this page is an overview of the Transformational Government Framework. So this is the top-level view of it, as it were. Those of you who've not had a chance to look at the material on the website yet and follow some of the links that John's just given, I urge you to do so, because there is quite a richness in the breadth and depth of the material that the TGF covers. This is an attempt to highlight on one slide what the main elements of it are. What I'm going to do is just talk through those main elements, not go into them in great detail. That wouldn't be possible in the time we have now, but to give a sort of tour of what's in there and explain how it all hangs together.
Chris, can you put the microphone closer to your mouth? We're getting intermittent.
Yeah. Okay. Is that better?
Much better. Thank you.
So, if you look at the way this is structured, there are really four main areas of the TGF that I'll talk through. So firstly, there are a set of what are called TGF guiding principles. What do I mean by that? Before I get onto the principles themselves, I just wanted to highlight two points from the TGF about what we mean by guiding principles. The first point is set out in the first paragraph there, really, that these are intended to be an enduring statement of values which can be used by the leadership of a transformational government program to steer decision-making as the program gets taken forward. And that's a recognition, really, that major organizational set of changes inside government is a long-term process. It can't be planned out in detail from day one. So it's necessary to have some principles in mind that the leadership of that process has signed up to, which they can use to steer the process as they go through. That's the first point, that these are intended to be an enduring set of value-based principles to drive the process. The second quote there, it makes the point that all of the principles are set out as statements of principle. We believe, and they are intended. They're written like that deliberately, because to tease out really the extent to which the leadership of the program genuinely do believe these. So this is really what we mean by guiding principles. Turning to the principles themselves, there are 5 at a headline level, which are some slide there. Each of these is then broken down in the TGF guiding principles description in slightly more detail. So these are not just high-level statements, but they have consequences. And those consequences are described in the principles. Number 1, we believe in detailed segmented understanding of our citizen and business customers, and doing that at the whole of government level, not an agency by agency definition of customers, but trying to understand the customer relationship with the public sector at its broadest sense. Secondly, we believe in services built around customer needs, not organizational structure. As John said at the outset, that's really one of the core difference between the transformational government initiatives that we see emerging around the world and previous attempts at deploying technology in the public sector. 3, we believe that transformation is done with citizens and businesses, not to them. Again, I think this is one of the trends John brought out. Increasingly, governments are trying to look at how technology can be used to enable co-creation of public services between citizens and businesses to allow, as it were, uploading as well as downloading in the way that the public services are delivered. Fourthly, we believe in growing the market for transformed services. Government really is in a unique position compared to any other provider of online services in that it can impact on not just demand for those services, but the size of the market. It can invest in skills and access and enabling the digital population of citizens and small businesses. So the TGF is very much focused not just on delivering services, but helping the market to shape and grow that as well. And fifthly, we believe in managing and measuring key critical success factors. And that statement of principle is then underpinned really by a more detailed section of the TGF which looks at these critical success factors. As you can see at the bottom of the screen there are 9 of these. Just to explain where these critical success factors come from, this is a quote from the TGF. We know that this sort of transformational journey faces significant risk to successful delivery. There are many examples around the world of IT-enabled change programs which have not delivered the sort of benefits which they were hoping for. Typically, these risks are not related to the technology itself. There are technical issues clearly that cause problems, but primarily it's business and cultural and organizational change issues which are at the root of the most risks. What we've done in the TGF is try to bring together the research from leading governments around the world on why some ICT-enabled transformation programs succeed and why others fail. And there is an increasing body of research on that in Europe, in Asia Pacific, in North America. And what we've tried to do through the TGF process is condense that into these 9 critical success factors that reflect and respond to that research. And there they are in a little more detail, but with much more detail and definition of these set out in the TGF itself. So it's the extent to which there is strategic clarity about what the program is trying to achieve in the first place, that there is leadership with the skills and governance processes needed to drive it forward, that user focus is embedded throughout the program, that the program's got the skills, stakeholder engagement needed to drive forward successfully. Supplier partnership, absolutely a pivotal part of this. Achievable delivery, future-proofing, and finally benefit realization. I think the key message here really is if there's an IT-enabled change project or program going wrong, not delivering the benefits that it's looking to achieve, our view in the OASIS DC is that that's almost certainly because one or more of these critical success factors is not being effectively managed. So the TGF puts a lot of focus on understanding these issues and managing them effectively. That final critical success factor, benefit realization, is one of the other major components of the TGF. So how can we in government build a benefit realization strategy which makes sure that our technology investments really deliver the benefits we're looking to achieve? And there are 3 elements of that in the TGF. So benefit mapping, what are the tools and methodologies which help ensure real clarity and line of sight between the activities and investments going in to the program and the end outcomes which are looking to be achieved. what are the mechanisms then, having mapped that out at the beginning of the program, for tracking and measuring and understanding the extent to which the program is on track against success trajectories or not. That's the whole benefit tracking area. And finally, the benefit delivery piece. So what are the governance mechanisms, the accountabilities that need to be in place to ensure that all the benefits which the program is aiming to deliver are actually delivered in practice. I turn now to really what the guts of the TGF, which is this central area of the high-level framework called delivery processes. And as you'll see, that highlights four major areas, four main delivery processes. And the contention of the TGF, drawn on based on experience from around the world, is that in each of these areas we need to find a way to manage them, to establish governance processes for each of those areas, which is government-wide and citizen-centric in each of the four areas: business management, the way decisions are made and priorities are set, customer management, channel management, and technology management. Now, what do we mean by managed in a government-wide and citizen-centric way? That does not mean a top-down, centrally planned, centrally managed approach in all of these areas. Government is just too big for that. It's in most countries, most states, most cities, the government is the single largest service provider with the greatest complexity of customer needs and the greatest range of services on offer. So managing all of that in a centralized way is not what we're talking about. But we do mean finding some ways to have an integrated strategy which draws together the efforts of the different organizations involved, finding a business model which works, which balances the need for that cross-government cohesion and integration, but also enables and allows local innovation and local entrepreneurship. And at the heart of that really is in effect a viral approach. That's the way that the TGF best practices seek to operate, to put in place business processes, capacities, structures that drive transformation over time, that don't try to achieve an instant big bang, but over time work virally, gain support, and over time create a reversible change. This is another view of the same set of issues there, showing really how they fit together on the business management side, issues around leadership, stakeholder engagement and management, around the business model, around the roadmap and benefit realization processes. Customer management, a whole set of processes in the TGF around taking a brand-led approach to service delivery and service development, and managing channels as an integrated basis. As I'll say, we don't have time to go through this, but in the TGFs, each one of these boxes and how they relate to each other is set in detail. And in particular, they are described in the TGF in a standardized way known as a pattern language. I'm going to hand over now to Peter to describe in more detail what that means and why we've used that as the basis for the standardized approach. Peter?
Peter?
Yes, I'm here. Just
okay.
There's a little bit of lag in the handover. Hopefully you should be able to see my screen now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, picking up from where Chris left off, maybe first of all a few words of explanation about what is understood by this concept of a pattern language. The concept originated through the work of a very well-known architect at the University of California in Berkeley, Chris Alexander, whose seminal work on architectural patterns called The Timeless Way of Building looked at a way across time that there are certain principles in all architecture which can be used to put together either whole cities or buildings, office spaces, working areas, homes, down to details such as where you would position your desk in a single office. So what he developed was an idea of a pattern language, which was a way of identifying the individual elements of architecture in a way that fit together neatly to give an overview of a particular problem area. The concept of a pattern language, although originally developed by Chris Alexander for architecture, has subsequently been adopted and adapted by many disciplines, particularly those involved in organizational change and in technology development. A pattern language needs to be understood firstly as a process for analyzing and identifying recurrent problems, to look at the sort of archetypal problem, to identify what are the core elements of a problem that keep recurring, and to identify a mechanism for capturing those problems and coming up with archetypal solutions to that problem. It must be stressed from the outset that a pattern language is not an out-of-the-box solution. You don't just pick it up and run with it and you have a implemented solution. It's rather a rational collection of familiar patterns with which a team can work in a particular domain, and it provides a vocabulary, a grammar, a structure, a plot, if you will. But as Chris Alexander himself says, each project has to write its own story. So what the pattern language does is provides a formal structure for organizational change, for example, but whilst remaining very prose-based. So it's not technology-driven, it's not technology-dependent, it's very much still rooted in human language and human-centered organizational work. So why did we choose to use or to create a pattern language for the Transformational Government Framework? We looked at a number of criteria, and I think the four key ones for us were, firstly, that the idea of a pattern language fit very well with the existing structure of the Transformational Government Framework, written very much as a prose document. It wasn't too formal, it is textual, it had elements of a common repeatable structure, it allowed for cross-referencing and a basic hierarchy of some of the parts, which Chris has already explained with the four high-level structures that the TGF consists of. We feel it was easy to use, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as we say in English, and transposing what was the existing primer document, which I'll come to shortly, was relatively painless in terms of mapping that into a new set of patterns for a pattern language. Thirdly, most importantly, the approach of pattern language is proven. The ideas have already been transposed in many IT-related areas, and there's various works on organizational patterns, design patterns, requirement patterns, and so on. And we felt, given the emphasis that John highlighted in the outset, that this is about people managing government transformation, and it's not about technology. We felt that the pattern language was easier to explain than formal technology-centered models like the UML, RDF, OWL, and so on, and particularly for managers who are not necessarily well-versed in details of technology, to have a set of templates, the individual patterns, which allow conversations to take place in terms of developing an organizational change strategy. So in terms of the TGF pattern language, what we have created is what we've called an initial set of patterns. We've called the core patterns. So as the name would suggest, it covers the core areas of the TGF, the principles, the four delivery processes, critical success factors, and the benefits realization strategy. And together we've published this as a document, whose formal title you can see in the little screenshot there, the Transformational Government Pattern Language Core Patterns version 1.0. It has been approved as a full OASIS committee specification, And as some of you who may be familiar with the OASIS process will know, there are two types of formal deliverables from within OASIS. One is the first step, which is the committee specification, which is a formalized and published document and deliverable, and that optionally has the opportunity of moving forward to another step, which is an OASIS standard, which is partly dependent on us getting feedback on proofs of use and implementation, and also membership-wide ballot within OASIS. So at the moment we're at the stage of a committee specification, and we're looking at moving that forward to a full OASIS standard in the coming months based on the various criteria that take us forward. Looking now just more, without going into too much detail, giving an example of a particular pattern. There are 20 patterns within the core patterns, and I've just taken, not entirely at random, but I took one which would fit on a single page easily, just to give you a sort of sense of the overall structure and content of an individual pattern. So aside from the pattern number and the pattern name, you have an introductory paragraph which will sometimes include cross-references to other patterns already defined in the pattern language, but essentially sets the scene. It gives a context for which this pattern is attempting to address a particular problem. So here we're looking at the question of stakeholder empowerment and looking at how traditionally many government programs have failed because citizens and business customers are seen as passive recipients rather than active stakeholders. So that first chunk is really to give a sense of why are we creating a pattern, what is the problem that's attempting to be addressed, and what's the context we're working on. The main chunk of the pattern is in this central section with a headline starting with a headline statement in bold, which tries to capture in a single phrase what the core issue is that we're trying to address. And our statement there is that service transformation is done with citizens, businesses and organizations, and not to them. That headline statement is then followed up with, if you like, a bit more detail on the body of the problem being addressed. Here it's still relatively concise. In some of the other patterns it obviously goes into much more detail. And then the key element of any pattern, and this we use faithfully the structure that Chris Alexander initially proposed in his initial pattern language for architecture, you follow that statement of the problem with this introductory therefore and a series of bulleted instructions, if you will, either an instruction or set of instructions, which point to an archetype solution. As Chris mentioned earlier, and which it should underline again here, this is not a out-of-the-box how to do something. It's rather an archetypal approach which should be taken. You will see that even though there are very clear statements here of what should be done to address the issue of stakeholder empowerment in this example, all of them are at a level which is still about policy making, about management level drivers, and doesn't go into elements of specific technology choices or particular specific details of the how you achieve this. They're high-level statements of core objectives to be achieved. And in a draft pattern, that solution, that large chunk in the middle, is then followed optionally by some what we call completion notes, which again include cross-references to other patterns that may further extend or refine the current pattern or related to the current pattern, and sometimes also to external references to existing material either within OASIS or beyond OASIS that would be relevant to working on that particular pattern. So that's an example of a pattern. In summary, it's each pattern follows the same structure. It's what Chris Alexander called the three-part rule. You establish a context, you identify the problem that's being addressed, and you identify an archetypal solution. Each pattern contains essentials that cannot be avoided. In other words, you really got to address the key things which must be taken on board if you want to address the highlighted or the headline issue. it also represents a current best guess, by which we mean that a pattern is not immutable, technology is not immutable, organizational change practices are not immutable. And what we have is a snapshot of what we think it reflects the best guess at best practices, best approaches that can be taken in addressing a particular problem. The whole beauty for me of a pattern language is it is something that is organic, that can evolve over time, that can be updated, each pattern individually or groups of patterns together in function of evidence and of experience, so that it's something that can evolve over time. It's not just completely fixed. The other thing is that each pattern can stand alone without being isolated, in the sense that you can use individual patterns to address a particular problem, but they are tied together in this broad network of patterns that also is not completely linear. In other words, you don't need to start at number 1 and work your way through to number 20. If there are particular problems that you need to address now, you can do that by taking on certain patterns that reflect a particular priority issue for you without necessarily having to precede that by other work. So it's a network of interrelated patterns, not a linear process. So the pattern language, we say it's a core set of patterns. Extensions are possible, and we are looking at, continually looking at extensions to that, which can add patterns either by broadening the scope of the initial Transformational Government framework, covering potentially new areas of policy or technology-driven change, or deepening, looking at more detail of the areas that need to be addressed. And it's on the second one, the deepening, that we've been looking at over the last few months. And there are a number of extensions under consideration. One is looking at, from the European Commission, they have a project called Common Assessment Methodology for Software and Standards. And we've talked with officials responsible for that project about the possibility of casting the results of their methodology in that project as a new set of patterns which would help people use the European Commission product in a way to help evaluate the use of software and standards in technology-driven change in the public sector. Another one is to look at an extension on the ISO standard covering corporate governance, and other ideas have looked at cloud computing and open data. Finally, that's all regarding the pattern language and what we've done on pattern language. We have a second document, which is the more extensive document and in fact preceded the pattern language document, and which actually covers, is a detailed overview of the whole TGF, structured in the parts that Chris has mentioned already, with an introduction, an overview of the TGF, the detailed description of the TGF that Chris has outlined, as well as some guidance notes for use. And that's published as what we call a committee note. It's not a formal standards document, but it's an approved document from the TGF committee and is intended to give additional guidance and background. This primer introduces a concept of policy product. And the idea of policy product is it has a value in identifying, tracking, and properly maintaining or curating specific policies that a government agency may have in relating to technology-enabled transformation. And with that, I would pass the torch back over to John, who will look at the issue of the policy products work that we're doing in the TGF in a bit more detail. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Peter. And get my screen up. So, policy products. What are they and where do they fit? Well, just to refer back to Chris's diagram that he showed you, this is what we're talking about, one component of the overall framework. And some of what I'm going to tell you in the next few minutes is very hot off the press and has only happened in the last few days. So this is our latest area of activity and as I say, it's a work in progress as we go. So what do we mean by a policy product? Well, we use this term very widely to cover any type of document, instruction, directive, whatever you want to say, that drives forward in a particular area of transformational government. And these products can be a single sheet of paper, it could be a full-blown directive from somewhere like the European Commission or a government. They can be a whole range of different types of things. But they do set out what needs to be done, and as we've sort of intimated already, we believe that transformational government requires a much more holistic approach to policy development, and this requires a much broader range of policy products than have previously perhaps been used. Within the policy product environment and the matrix I'm going to show you, we follow the generally accepted life cycle of strategic planning. So there's some vision set down by ministers and governments that's turned into policy, from which a strategy is produced to deliver that policy. That leads into plans and operation, and the whole point of this is to try and ensure that there is a read across between the vision to the operation, and you can track that what the ministers want essentially actually gets delivered, so there is some sort of audit trail. And with any conformant program, we want to use the matrix to create a map of the products that are needed for that particular program. How do we construct this matrix that I'm talking about? Well, there's two dimensions to it. On the one hand, we've taken what is perhaps the most widely accepted interoperability framework. That's the one produced by the European Commission, and this recognizes 5 levels of interoperability: political, legal, organizational, semantic, and technology. And those 5 levels, I think, are generally accepted around the world now as the various levels of interoperability that need to be addressed in any business change program. And what we've done then is we've mapped those interoperability levels against the delivery processes that Chris outline: the business, customer, channel, technology, and you get a matrix. And then within each cell of that matrix, there are a whole range of different policy products, things that need to be produced or considered about. And this just gives you some examples. This is not the full list. I'll point to the full list in a minute, and there are many, many more on that list. But sorts of things we're talking about: benefits realization strategy, risk management. You get on then to legal frameworks, business process models, common data standards, channel management. There's a whole range of these product things that that need to be considered and produced if necessary. Just to give you an instance of what they look like, the metadata implementation guidelines. Here's an example of what you would see if you clicked on one of the cells that I'll point to in a minute. So this tells you what it is, what it's about, gives you an indication of what the type of product is. It tells you what problem you're addressing within it, and this again can be a useful way of decomposing the overall responsibilities into specific sectors. So there's a whole range of stuff, for instance, around information management that needs to be picked up and managed and governed throughout the program, and that may fall to one individual, it might be falling to several. We will then post in these examples which we believe are relevant and appropriate, and in this particular case we're pointing to some recent work by the Commission called their ADMS schema, and that's a particular example, and there's a link to it there. And in the notes section of these cell examples, we will show links to other patterns that are relevant and also other external references that we think are relevant. Now clearly, when you're into this sort of exercise, trying to maintain these links and this list of examples is difficult because they constantly change, there are new ones coming about, etc. But we are attempting to do our best to make sure what is available within the matrix is kept up to date, and we're always on the lookout for new contributions to this. So how do we use it? While in the early days of establishing a program, and this comes back to some of the things that Chris touched on earlier, We see it as a very good assessment tool to help you identify what you need to do, what needs to be focused on, and what things you consciously can disregard. And as I said earlier, when you come down to perhaps local level, local council level, or state or county level within the US, for instance, some of these things may not be appropriate because they're dealt with by the national government. So you can consciously disregard them, but there has to be a conscious decision. So it provides a framework for a gap analysis. It allows you to build a policy community that all those that have a stake in that particular aspect of the policy, like information management or whatever dimension it is, can come together and be connected and develop those policy products. And as we said, where a single agency wishes to implement it, it doesn't have to involve the whole of other agencies, then a more selective use of the whole matrix would be appropriate. One area we do point out on this, and it's an increasing one that people should focus on, there's an increasing use of cloud and increasing use of private sector clouds. And many people might take the view that, okay, I've employed an external cloud provider to deliver my services, therefore I don't need to worry about certain areas of responsibility that the cloud provider needs to pick up. That's not the way we see it. You need to manage your cloud provider, even though they may be doing a lot of the grunt work. You need to make sure that you are managing what they are doing and make sure they are delivering to your requirements, to your business rules, to your privacy laws, etc. So there's some interesting dimensions there. You'll find the actual documentation that we've produced on this at this reference, and as I said earlier, this is actually in the process now of being formally approved. It's been out for public review, and that review finished actually on Monday of this week, so this is hot off the press that we're now in the process of approving this as a committee note. And the actual matrix itself is on our wiki site, and you can go on to that and click on each cell, and you can see all the entries in all the cells for all the different product types that we've identified so far. As I said earlier, there's far more than was shown on that brief example I pointed to you. So a lot of work there that's going on in this area, but a key area of managing an overall TGF program. Okay, with that, I'll pass quickly back to Chris, who's going to give you some brief insights to some use cases that we're aware of.
Okay, thank you, John. So use cases. Well, the first thing to say clearly is that the TGF itself is new. It's the formal specification was only ratified and published in January this year. So we're talking about something that is new. But in terms of use cases, there are two things I'd like to highlight, really. First is that although as a framework it is new, it does draw together methodologies that have been proven and demonstrated in a range of different jurisdictions around the globe. So this here I've just listed some of the national and regional governments, state governments that we know, which are successfully deploying key parts of the methodological framework, which have now been sort of brought together in the TGF. The patterns, as it were, some of the core patterns on the business model, on the transformation roadmap, and so on. And as you can see from the range of types of country there, this is demonstrated success in not just one sort of government, but many different types of governments of different shapes and sizes and cultural backgrounds. So we are clear that there is a robust underpinning to the methodologies here, because they're being used in practice. Looking to the future, now that the TGF has been published as a specification, there is a significant amount of interest in it already. The members of the OASIS TC committee are already engaged in I've said due diligence there, but discussions, serious discussions about how governments might use the framework to help shape their strategies and delivery plans around IT and IT-enabled change. We are talking with national governments who are interested in using the framework at a whole of government, whole of public sector level. We're talking also to state and city level governments who are looking at how they can use that within their more local environment. We're also talking to a number of federal or national agencies interested in using the TGF as a framework to deliver cross-government IT-enabled change, but in one specific area of business, whether that's procurement, for example, or emergency management, where people are looking to bring together and galvanize change across agencies. So that's some of the outreach work and due diligence work that we're currently involved with. We know that a number of the international organizations which are looking to build a capability of governments in this whole area are also interested in and promoting the TGF. The World Bank was there at the start. The initial workshop which launched the public consultation on the TGF was held by OASIS in Washington DC in collaboration with the World Bank, and they've since been promoting it to at a series of workshops with government leaders in their client countries. Here in Europe, the ERISA, the European Regional Information Society Association, has embraced the TGF and is promoting it to their members, the European regions, as a best practice framework for driving IT-enabled change. So there is an increasing amount of interest in and activity, and we hope take up around the TGF. Handing now back to John to talk about how we plan to take this forward.
John, we can't hear you.
I'm on mute, silly me, thank you. Yes, sorry, just to tell you where we're going. Peter touched on this. Our objective is to get to an OASIS standard ratification at the earliest opportunity, but that requires practical implementations as case studies. And we would like to possibly then venture and submit this to ISO to become an ISO standard. There is an agreement between OASIS and ISO for passing OASIS standards into ISO, and we will be looking at that hopefully at some stage in the not too distant future. We're clearly going to look and maintain and enhance what's out there at the moment. So further patterns that Peter touched on, further entries in the policy product, matrix entries, etc., and further guidance on the whole set of primer deliverables. We're actively now pursuing and delivering multilingual versions of some of this material, and this is an ongoing piece of work. We've already got a Norwegian version, thanks to one of our TC members. I've been promised versions in Spanish and French, hopefully next week, and we are talking to people about Japanese and Dutch versions. So we're trying to get as many multilingual versions around as possible, and if anybody's willing to contribute time and effort, please get in touch on that. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of further work, and on our website you'll find a document called the TGF Products List. And it sets out our envisaged work program for the next 12 to 18 months, and you'll see from that there's a lot of things we have in mind that needs to be done, and we'll do our level best to get round to it and deliver on some of it. We clearly want to capture more use cases and use those. We want to provide the tool support that has been mentioned earlier. And we're increasingly looking and talking to different sectors of the public sector and the possibility of producing profiles for them, two in particular that are currently in hand: emergency management community and the health community in Norway. So we're exploring how we might produce, as I say, a profile or a subset for those particular communities. It may be just a specific subset of the policy product list, or it may require a much broader cut of the whole framework. We're not sure on that at the moment. We're clearly looking for every opportunity to reach out to folks, go and presenting and at conferences and workshops, and looking to encourage adoption across the public sector. And we're always on the lookout for new TC members, so if any of you have the time, effort, willingness and experience, please come and join our efforts. So a lot of work still to do. We've done very well to get to where we are over the last 15, 18 months, but this is still a long way to go. So I hope that's all been useful and has given you some broad understanding of what the TGF is around. Just to reinforce, it's all available on our websites, and you can always contact me at any time and I'll get back to you. And with that, concludes the presentations, and I'll hand back to Dee now, who's going to guide us through the Q&A session if we've got a few minutes to spare.
We've got just a few, so I'll be as quick as possible. This is a good question because it probably will fit in well with some of the other folks that we have that are attendees today. In the beginning of the presentation, John, you talked about a distinction between transformational government and EGov2. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
On the use of the term EGov2, or between eGov and transformational government. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
Yes. Why do you call this effort transformational government and not EGov2?
Okay. As I tried to show on that one of my slides there, if you looked at what EGovernment was about, it was very much about bolting technology onto the existing business structures, business models of government. And generally, when you move on through these sorts of acronyms to like eGov, to EGov2, EGov3, that suggests almost a link to what's gone before, and it's just an enhancement and modification of that. We felt when we came together as a committee that the fundamental change between what we're looking at now and what has gone before warranted a different title or handle. And we felt that transformational government was the better handle to show that this was something almost not completely new, but very different from the earlier EGov programs. As I said in my earlier note, a lot of people are using the term EGov2, and okay, fine if that's what the majority want to use, but we think that's possibly not the right term to use.
Okay, here are two more questions that kind of fit nicely together. The policies referred to in the policy product management delivery process, are they the total set of public policies in force, or only those implicated in or needed for the transformational journey? Now that's the first one, and then this next one, it sort of comes in nicely, and let's see if we can answer both of them. Oh dear. What are the critical first steps to start the journey? Isn't that funny? They were back-to-back questions.
Okay. Chris, do you want to pick up on that one, please, on both of those?
Yeah, okay, happy to. On the first one, I think the answer is that our focus has been on what are the policy products needed to define and drive the transformational journey. So it's not trying to describe the entire universe of government policy and how it maps into this framework. That would be an overly ambitious task. It's about, here we are looking to manage a program of change. What are all the elements that we need to what are the guidelines, the standards, the laws, the policy documents that we need to put in place to drive that process of change. So that's the answer to the first point. And clearly, we're not saying that what the material that's out there is even on that narrow definition entirely complete, where it's indicative and illustrative, and it's as John said, each TGF user really needs to go through the framework and use the process to help decide what policy products are right for their specific program. On where do you start? I think the key point is this is a quick fix. and this is not an overnight change. So we are looking at a multi-year program of change. So the best place to start, I think, is not really with all of the details, but in terms of looking at the TGF guiding principles, because they are really intended to help guide and steer that journey. So you need to ask the question: do we, as a leadership team in this government or this sector or this state, do we understand and sign up to those principles? Because if so, they help to shape the priorities and directions that we'll take on that journey. And the committee has genuinely put them forward as a set of principles that we believe are universal, they're applicable in all government contexts. So if you think you disagree, then our contention is that perhaps you've not properly understood the principle or some of the challenges you're going to face down the track. So think again. Having done that, I think the next step is to develop the roadmap for the journey, and there's material in the patterns and the primer about how to build the roadmap. So you sequence this in the right way. You don't try and get everything done at once, but you put in place the key building blocks for citizen-centric service delivery. Start building some quick wins, which get your stakeholders on side and allow you to learn more about what citizens want and how to refine your delivery mechanisms to deliver against that. So that would be my advice. Start with the principles, start with understanding those, and then start building the roadmap to manage the process.
Okay, we still have folks hanging on, so let me ask one more question. I know we're a little bit past the hour, but I think this is a question that's useful to everybody. Will you be providing conformance testing or accreditation for conformance with the core pattern languages?
One for Peter, I think.
That sounds like one for me. Yeah, it's a very good question. I think the simple answer is no, partly because the scope of OASIS work often falls short of providing conformance testing or accreditation. When OASIS as an agency isn't a standards body that does conformance testing or accreditation. That doesn't mean that people can't set themselves up very, very straightforwardly, can't set themselves up in business in doing exactly that sort of thing. If you take something like the ISO 9000 or the ISO 27000 series of standards, although ISO as a standards body doesn't provide conformance testing or accreditation, it provides mechanisms which allow businesses to be created which do that sort of accreditation and testing. And I think in the specific example of the core patterns, the question of testing or accreditation for conformance is very much in the eye of the beholder, to the extent that if you feel that you've achieved the critical success factors, for example, or that you've delivered against specific guiding principles, that is probably your best indication that things are on track. I think just to wrap up, I mean, the issue of conformance testing and accreditation is something which is an ongoing debate. In the process, as I mentioned earlier, of moving us from a committee specification to an OASIS standard, there will be a phase where we will be looking for feedback from industry, from governments, to show that they've taken on the set of the 20 core patterns and said, yep, we've used those, they helped in our overall effort, and we've used them according to the guidelines of that are given, and that will provide us within the committee an opportunity to say that the core patterns as a committee specification is mature enough to move on to an OASIS standard. So short answer, no, we don't provide it ourselves, but there is clearly an opportunity as this whole area becomes more mature for private sector and public sector together to develop tools and methodologies to provide such conformance testing or accreditation.
Dee, can I just add one line to that? Not
Absolutely.
Just to supplement what Peter said. Our responsibility is to set down, without any fear of ambiguity or confusion, the clear criteria for conforming to the TGF so that accreditation agencies like Peter described can pick it up and implement it without any controversy or anything else. So we will make sure that we are very clear in saying this is what must be done to be a conformant program.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Peter, John, and Chris. That was great. And on behalf of OASIS, I would like to thank everybody that took some time out of their day to listen to this very important work. Again, I'll be following up with an email with a link to the recorded webinar. And stay tuned for future webinars. Thank you very much. Have a great day.